Dogs make the best companions for humans. This podcast aims to help make humans better companions for their dogs. Welcome to the Baru Podcast, a modern lifestyle podcast for dogs and their people. I'm your host, Charlotte Bain. I've been caring for other people's dogs for more than 15 years. And while I've learned a lot in my career, I definitely don't know it all. So I've collected an ever-evolving roster of amazing dog people. And I learn new things from them all the time. Hi, you guys. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the Baru Podcast. Today, I chat with Elizabeth Oreck. Elizabeth is the National Manager of Best Friends Animal Society's housing initiatives, which is dedicated to helping keep pets with their people regardless of their housing situation. She's also the National Manager of Best Friends Society's Puppy Mill initiatives, and she has been instrumental in changing legislation around pet stores and puppy mills in many states throughout the U.S. We chat about the connection between puppy mills, dogs you find online, and pet stores, and why it's so important to do your research and adopt or purchase a dog from a shelter, reputable rescue, or reputable breeder. So let's jump into the chat. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course. My pleasure. I love talking about this.
Well, before we talk about your amazing work that you do in animal welfare and with Best Friends Animal Society, I'm always super curious what the journey is for somebody who ends up working with animals, especially in animal welfare. Was it something that was innately in you from the get-go, or was there a specific situation that happened in your life which made you kind of pivot and do this kind of work?
All of the above.
Okay.
So I think that most of us who end up working in animal welfare have that innate love of animals, passion for animals, connection with animals that you mentioned. And I always had that, even as a very, very, very little person, as a baby. There's so many pictures of me, with my arm around some stray dog I found in an alley, or trying to save baby birds, all that kind of thing. Yeah. And when I was growing up, animal welfare wasn't really a career option unless you wanted to either work in a zoo, which I didn't want to do, or work as a veterinarian, which I also didn't want to do because I couldn't bear the thought of ever losing an animal, of, an animal dying in my care. And those were really the only options. And had it been the way it is today, where, there are animal welfare programs in colleges and you can major in that, you can get into animal law, all these other options, then that definitely would have been the route I would have gone.
Right.
So I was volunteering and I was, doing my own kind of rescuing and that sort of thing as I was on different paths in my life. And then I was working as an interior designer.
Nice.
And just, kind of wasn't interested, didn't really want to do it anymore. And I said to my partner at the time, why can't someone pay me to just lie on the floor and play with puppies all day?
Yeah.
why isn't that a thing?
Sounds like a good deal.
Right. And honest to God, that day, he was looking through the Sunday Times, the LA Sunday Times, and he found this job posting for somebody to open and run a pet adoption center for SPCA LA, where we had just adopted a cat. And he said, this is the job that you should apply for. And I did, and I got it and worked my way up to running all the adoption centers for SPCA LA, became a managing director. And from that point on, and that was in 1998.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, obviously straight out of high school.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say.
Please don't do the math. Don't do the math. From that point forward, I just, I started doing a whole variety of things in animal welfare, from wildlife rehab to co-founding the first mobile spay and neuter clinic in LA to working on a legislative campaign for spay and neuter in California. Just everything that I could do. I was so interested in all of it. And then 14 years ago, landed at Best Friends just also by accident. I was doing some volunteer work for them and they offered me a job and I took it thinking, all right, I'll try it for a year, see how I feel. And 14 years later, I'm still here and overseeing our national puppy mill campaign as well as some other things.
That's fantastic. For some people who may not know what Best Friends Animal Society is, I don't know how they wouldn't, but there are some that have never heard of Best Friends Animal Society. Would you give a little bit of background on Best Friends Animal Society?
Sure. So Best Friends Animal Society is one of the leading national animal welfare organizations in the U.S., and we were founded in 1984. We started being known as the largest no-kill animal sanctuary in the country, based in Southern Utah. That's still our home base. That's still the heart and soul of Best Friends. It's an amazing place, just absolutely spectacular, breathtakingly beautiful, inspiring sanctuary. But at this point, we have programs and partners and staff and adoption centers all across the country, from California to New York. And our mission is to end the killing of dogs and cats in our nation's shelters by 2025. So we are a leading no-kill organization that is really focused on saving the lives of animals in our nation's shelters, in every community, every shelter, every state in the country. So it's really, the thing that I love about Best Friends is that we are a very data-driven organization and a very positive organization. So you will never receive from Best Friends, something that makes you feel sad, something that you don't want to look at, negative imagery. We always take the positive, hopeful approach because we know that that's how you engage with people. That's how people want to help, want to be a part of the movement. We don't want to ever guilt someone or depress someone into taking action, because that's not what this is. If we are truly going to become a no-kill nation, people have to feel inspired and they have to feel hopeful and they have to feel energized. And you can't do that by telling the terrible story. You have to tell the positive stories. So that's what I love about Best Friends, because animal welfare can be tough. I mean, you do see the best and worst of people. You do see some things that can stay with you for a long, long time, but it's not sustainable to dwell on that. You have to be able to find the good in everything and everyone that's involved. And that's how we've been able to help take this nation from killing 17 million animals in our nation shelters every year to we're down to 355,000. And that's, still too many, but that's a huge jump in a relatively short time.
Huge leap. Absolutely. Yeah. So can we touch on that briefly? Why are so many animals being put down in shelters? Like, why do they put the animals down in shelters? For people who just don't know anything about rescue or anything about the shelter life, what are some of what are the factors that go into that?
Well, the number one reason that animals are surrendered to shelters is due to housing issues. Yep. And that's a big problem right now, especially because we have a national housing crisis. There is a lack of affordable housing. Rents are skyrocketing, and nobody should ever have to choose between their family member, whether that's human or otherwise, and a safe place to call home. And unfortunately, there are a lot of places that don't allow people to have pets. There are places that allow pets, but with certain restrictions in terms of size or breed, which is so unfair.
Absolutely.
And so people are having to make the heartbreaking decision to give up their pet in order to have a place to live. And a lot of people won't actually make that decision, which means there are a lot of people and their pets living on the streets, living in their cars. And so that is the number one reason, some kind of barrier, whether it's an onerous pet deposit or pet rent or just flat out prohibitions on having pets. And then there's also, obviously sometimes people just don't have the resources to care for their pets. They can't afford the food or the veterinary treatment. Veterinary treatment can be very, very expensive.
Incredibly expensive.
Especially now with the vet shortage that we're seeing nationally, that's made that market very competitive. And so there are barriers that are not insurmountable. We can help, and we do help. We've got programs where we, help establish pet food pantries or just connect people to services in the community that they may not know exist to help them get through that time. Because again, it's not about, you shouldn't have to make that choice, first of all, between your pet and, just being able to care for your pet or care for yourself.
Right.
But also having money does not make you a better pet guardian.
Yes.
And I have seen some of the happiest pets I've ever encountered living with unhoused people.
Yeah.
Which is, for a lot of people, something that they sort of project onto that pet and say, oh, homeless people shouldn't have pets. I don't believe that. There was a time when I believed that, to be honest. But now I realize that those are some of the happiest pets because they're with their people all day and they're loved and they're outside and they're, as long as they receive the nutrition and the care that they need.
Absolutely.
There's absolutely nothing better about a pet living in a 10,000 square foot house with someone who's not ever home or the pet's, living in the yard, and somebody who's with their pet all day who may not have, a technical brick and mortar home, but still has a home with their pet that's, maybe unconventional. So I think that part of why we've seen so much improvement in the number of pets coming into shelters and losing their lives in shelters is because there's just better awareness now. And I'm an example of it. And I think a lot of people are an example of how we can just evolve and expand our thinking about pets and how they are a part of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to touch on what you were saying about the unhoused population in the gift that they're giving to the pet, by being able to be with them all day long and giving them, love and life. And in turn, the pets are, they're family members. That's a lot of what keeps someone trucking, keeps someone going during the hard times is the love and the unconditional love that they're receiving from their pet and the unconditional love that they're able to give to their pet without judgment. So
absolutely.
It's a win-win
that's
kind of,
why, and that's why pet inclusive homeless shelters are so important because we know the data says it there's so many anecdotal stories about it, that there are a lot of people who will choose not to receive much needed services for themselves if it means having to give up their pet. And so we've worked on a lot of policy changes in California and beyond that help those shelters be more pet inclusive so that they can serve their clients while serving, as we refer to, both ends of the leash, so that those pets who, as you said, are often someone's only family member, their lifeline, their connection to the outside world, more valuable to those people than to, a lot of other more privileged people. Yeah. And so it's really important to think more holistically when we're trying to support communities and really think about, what is going to be best for keeping families together. Yeah. And families can include those pets as well and should include those pets as well.
From a more technical standpoint, what does creating space for pets in homeless shelters look like? Like what needs to happen in order to do that? Obviously funding, but from a technical standpoint, what needs to happen to make that work?
Right. So the ones that have done it generally will have some sort of kennel next to the bed of the human person.
Okay.
They will have certain protocols, certain codes of conduct, basic rules.
Right.
Providing collars and leashes is obviously really important for dogs. Making sure that there's an understanding to keep everybody safe, so that it's healthy for everyone who's living in that facility, whether they have a pet or not. So it doesn't have to be a major overhaul. They
Right.
don't need to do construction or things like
Got
that,
it.
but having a place for those pets to relieve themselves and making sure that they're well fed and vaccinated. If there are spay and neuter opportunities, that's always a good thing, just in general. But I think a lot of times it's just changing sort of the mindset of
Right.
what should be permitted. And that can sometimes be the biggest hurdle to get over. But fortunately, there's precedents already set in places that have done that. And California put a pretty nice $10 million funding into the budget this year to give grants to homeless shelters that are pet inclusive to help them,
Fantastic.
with those kinds of things. So yeah, it's kind of great to see that people understand that this is really, really important. If we're going to serve our vulnerable populations, we have to really think about them in their entire families.
Right. I wanted to jump into, so this is what some of the work that you do with the housing initiatives, right? Mm-hmm. And you also work with, as you stated before, with initiatives regarding puppy mills. And I wanted to jump into that a bit. Do you want to talk about some of the work that you do there? I think that, first I want to say that I think everybody knows puppy mills are a bad word, but they don't quite maybe make the connection between a puppy mill, what that actually means and looks like in buying a dog from a pet store, right?
Right. And that's the connection that we're always struggling with,
right?
Because the people that are walking in and buying that adorable puppy in the window aren't seeing where that puppy came from. They're not seeing how the parents lived there, because it's generally out of state, right? Yeah. And there is a level of transparency that does not exist for the puppy buyer, especially if they're buying that puppy online. There's even less, because they're not even seeing the conditions that the puppy is living in, much less the parents.
I didn't even think about the whole new online aspect of getting a puppy from
yes.
there. So,
Yes. And that's a much murkier, more challenging, task for us, because for obvious reasons, everything that's sold online has a veil of secrecy around it.
Right.
And so puppy mills are, as everybody I think knows by now, they are commercial breeding facilities where profit takes priority over the health and welfare of the animals. They are regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which should tell you a lot right there, because that's the same agency that regulates cattle farms and feedlots and, battery caged chickens and research labs for mice and rats. Like, that's all under the federal government. Mm-hmm. But the minimum standards of care for the animals in those facilities are so abysmal that they're basically survival standards. Right. So dogs in commercial breeding facilities can be kept in wire cages, stacked one on top of each other, that only need to be 6 inches larger than the dog itself, not including the tail.
Wow.
They can be kept in those cages 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years without ever being taken out, even for a moment. Yeah. And just breeding and breeding and breeding and breeding in order to produce as many puppies as possible to be resold in pet stores and online. And, people say, well, why can't you just shut all the puppy mills down? Well, because they're legal until, they are no longer legal. We can't do that. But what we can do is educate people and encourage people not to support the industry through their consumer habits, so that puppy mills won't even have a reason to exist. And that's a much better, it's such a simple solution. If people stopped buying what they were selling, they would have no reason to produce those puppies and they would cease to exist. That's so simple, but getting there is the hard part, because people want what they want, and social media has a huge influence over what people think they want. And, the immediate gratification of buying anything you want online and having it delivered the next day has translated to people buying puppies that way, which I got to tell you, I never saw that coming.
No.
I mean, back when, the internet really took off and Amazon and everything, you could get whatever you wanted, I never thought people would get their pets that way.
Yeah.
I just thought, well, everyone's going to want to meet the puppy,
get a connection and
get a connection, make sure it's the right man. I mean, I never saw that coming. So that my bad. But it is a reality now. And so, that's kind of been more of a shift in our focus. We started by tackling the brick and mortar pet stores where we knew puppy mill puppies were being sold and milled kittens were being sold. And so we started doing peaceful demonstrations in front of those stores to bridge that disconnect you talked about between the puppy mill and the pet store. And working on humane pet sales laws that really restricted pet stores from importing puppy mill puppies to be resold and instead allowing them to partner with shelters or rescue groups like Petco and PetSmart and other stores do, where they're really helping shelter animals find homes, but in a pet store setting. Basically the same thing I was doing for SPCA back, in the 90s. And that was kind of the low-hanging fruit because we knew where those pet stores were. And there are far fewer of them today than there were when we started working on this. But now we have to address the online sales and the Craigslist, puppy mill sales and all of that. And that's a lot harder because we really don't know where those breeders are or where those sellers are. And so we have to navigate the murky underworld of the internet.
Yeah. What about when people say, I've had people say to me before, well, those dogs have to go somewhere, so why don't I just get one? A specific incident where someone got 2 puppies from a puppy mill. She got from a pet store. She got caught up in the moment. She's like, but somebody has to take them, right? So what would you say to something like that? Or how do you explain that to somebody?
Yeah, that's a very common thing. We actually have a resource document on our website, Why Not to Rescue a Puppy. Because it comes up so often because people worry, especially if it's somebody who's constantly either in the store or passing by the store and they see those puppies getting bigger and bigger.
Sure.
But what happens is they get marked down. Those puppies are safe. There is nothing to fear about the outcomes of the puppies that are already in the stores.
Got it.
They will get sold. They will get given away. Right. Nothing bad is going to happen to them. They will have a positive outcome. The problem is when you, quote unquote, rescue a puppy from a pet store, you're just creating a space for another inhumanely bred puppy from some terrible big puppy mill in, Missouri or Nebraska or wherever to be made. So it's just an ongoing cycle. And the only way to stop it is to stop buying those puppies so that they will not have that outlet to sell them. And so that's why we just take a hands-off approach to anybody who feels that temptation. Just stay out of the store because it is very tough. I mean, it's hard not to fall in love with those puppies in the first place. Absolutely. And that's why they put them in the window. And that's why a lot of those pet stores are in the mall where they know you may be walking by to pick up a pair of boots and you see that cute puppy in the window. Those aren't the ones we're worried about. We're worried about the parents of those puppies who are just living abysmal lives, breeding over and over to produce those cute puppies. And also the fact that the way they're bred and the inbred and the overbreeding, it's not creating a superior product. It is creating a puppy that is very likely going to be sick, be genetically compromised, end up costing that unsuspecting buyer a lot of money. Right. And that's why some of those puppies end up in the shelter, because if you pay $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for a puppy at a pet store, and that is how much the going rate. Oh yes, gosh. It is. And then God help you if you finance, because a lot of the pet stores will offer financing, which is how a lot of college kids end up with puppies they can't afford. They're not even reading the fine print, which ends up often being at 180% interest rate. And so that $10,000 puppy ends up costing $60,000. And on top of that, they're very often sick. We hear story after story after story of people buying these puppies and 2 days later the puppy dies because it has some, horrible disease that they didn't know, existed, because it's really just about getting them in the store and getting them out and sold as quickly as possible before, anyone even knows they're sick. And then they end up with, $30,000 in vet bills they end up with a puppy who's not even still alive, and they're on the hook to pay off the puppy that they financed. So it's so horrible. And so, you would think that because you're paying so much that you're getting some just gold standard product.
Right.
And that's not the case. And meanwhile, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of beautiful, healthy, treatable, adoptable animals of all sizes, ages, temperaments, breeds are at risk in our shelters simply because there's this surplus of animals being produced for people who think they want, a golden doodle or a Maltipoo or whatever it is. And you can walk into a shelter and get a puppy or get a fantastic dog for $50 and it's microchipped and vaccinated and spayed and neutered and you're saving a life. And it's like that it's so nonsensical to me that anybody would just shell out so much money to support such a cruel industry. So that's what we're trying to educate people about the, amazing animals looking for homes and shelters and all the problems associated with animals coming from these either backyard breeders or commercial puppy mills.
I think my guy was like $100 total, and he's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Right? And don't think that those shelter dogs don't know they've been rescued, because I got to tell you, I have absolutely felt like every one of my rescues has known what life was like before and what life is like now. And boy, that's, if nothing else, that's the big payoff.
I'm staring at him right now because he's just so cute.
What kind of dog is he?
He is, well, we did the DNA, he's almost 15 now, but we did the DNA test, and he's, I don't know how accurate those are, but was like 55% Staffordshire Terrier and the rest like a hodgepodge if they don't really have any idea.
That's the best kind. That's the best kind. I love that.
So yeah, he's a sweet boy. So that would be, if someone is looking for a dog, that would be your first recommendation would be to go to your shelter and.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Start with your shelter, your local rescue groups. Be careful of the adoption language, which has been kind of misappropriated by the breeding industry, because they know that a lot of people want to adopt and want to feel good about adopting. And so you'll see a lot of puppies being sold on Craigslist, for example, with $5,000 price tags. And they say, for adoption. And I'm sorry, but if you're paying anything over, a couple $100, that's a sale. That's not an adoption. Yeah. So make sure you start with a shelter or rescue group. That's what we always recommend. And be patient, because it's not like, we have this immediate gratification, as I said before, about what we obtain, because you can get anything, same day these days. Yeah. And when you're dealing with a pet, a family member who's going to be with you for, ideally years and years, you may not find the pet of your dreams overnight. But if you can be patient and just wait until you find the one that you really connect with, and put that before the label of a golden doodle or it's interesting to me, because I see a lot of people looking for the name, looking for a certain breed, assuming that they're all the same within that breed. And every animal is an individual, and they all have different personalities, even if they're the same quote unquote breed or designer breed. And so it's an odd way to approach it. And I don't begrudge anyone, wanting what they want, but I think that if you just open your mind to all dogs that are, that fit whatever criteria your lifestyle would dictate, or if you need a certain size, or you want a certain age, or that kind of thing, start with that. But then, open yourself up to what's out there, because sometimes you can just fall in love with what you didn't expect to fall in love with. And that's the one for you. Right. So, for people who are not, who just can't find what they want through adoption, or maybe just aren't there yet. We just recommend that if you're going to go to a breeder, make sure you go to a local breeder, make sure that you are able to see for yourself the conditions under which the dogs were raised. We do have information on our website about what to look for and certain things that might be red flags, and just, try and stay off platforms like Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and places like that. Pet Finder is a fantastic resource. It's a national database of all rescue and shelter animals across the country. You can put in your zip code and your criteria, what you're looking for. Those are all rescues, and that's a good way to, kind of see what's out there. But just avoid the rescues that have, high price tags and a lot of puppies of the same age, that kind of thing. Those are all red flags that you're not really dealing with a rescue.
And I think people would be surprised when they start doing research that you can find that Labrador, you can find that golden retriever, you can find those dogs, because people, again, relinquish dogs to shelters for so many different reasons. Most of it is just finances. Yeah.
That's right. Or, sometimes somebody dies and they don't have somebody in the family to take care of that animal. I can tell you that I had a 6-month-old purebred Saint Bernard that I adopted from an LA City shelter. I wasn't looking for a Saint Bernard. I was looking to adopt a dog, and we were walking through, and there was this big, beautiful, drooly Saint Bernard, and he was the best ambassador for adoption ever, because I would walk him down the street, and of course, all Saint Bernards kind of look alike, so you know one when you see one, and people would just go crazy, and they'd want to pet him, and oh boy, I told every single person, I adopted him from the municipal shelter as a puppy, and that's what you can find in the shelter. So please start with a shelter. And, most of them have their adoptable animals online now anyway. So it's not like you have to drive around and go from shelter to shelter. You can go to Petco. You can see who they have for adoption. I mean, there's so many ways to find amazing animals that are humane and responsibly sourced, and you can feel good about that. You don't have to walk into, a puppy store or buy a puppy online to get the dog of your dreams.
I wanted to circle back a little bit to puppy stores. And we here in California, we've changed, or you may have had something to do with that. I'm not, we've changed the law. So the quote unquote pet stores only have, adoptable rescue dogs, essentially, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I did work on that law. That was the first, yay! That was the first statewide. I also worked on all of the local ordinances that led to that. So Los Angeles and Hermosa Beach and San Francisco, and all of those ordinances that got us to the point where we could do this statewide. California was the first state.
When did we do this? Like 2018 or something? It hasn't been that long, has it?
No, 2017. But then we had to go back and tweak it a little bit to close some loopholes that some sketchy pet stores found some workarounds. And we had to go back and tighten it up a little bit 2 years ago, so that there wouldn't be these loopholes for puppy mills to suddenly become rescue pet stores. But as California goes, so do other states. And so that was followed by Maryland, Maine, Washington, Illinois, now New York. We're just waiting for the governor to sign that bill. So it's kind of amazing, because having been around for so long, I remember when the second ordinance was passed in the country. Right. And now we're at 449. Of my gosh. Pet sale, humane pet sales laws that include cities, counties, and states across North America. And it's pretty amazing to see the momentum build from, working on, I worked on West Hollywood, which was like number 5, I think. And now, we're at almost 450. So that's what I mean about just the momentum of education and awareness. And, we saw the same thing with the environment. I remember when, people weren't recycling, and, Ed Begley was the only one who was driving around in an electric car, and you see him around Los Angeles and he's cuckoo for the environment. And now you don't even think about it, right? You bring your reusable bags into the grocery store, you separate your recycling. And so I feel like pet acquisition and animal welfare is at that same tipping point where we just, there was an old way of thinking about things, and now there's a different way of thinking about things, and adopting is cool and all of that. And we just want to stay ahead of any new trends that might set us back a little bit. So
are there any ones that you're specifically thinking of, or?
Well, I think the doodle craze is, has certainly inadvertently created a demand that is unfortunate, because it is creating a lot of inhumane breeding, and it's focusing, it's creating a profit margin for anytime profit is involved. You're going to get a lot of people wanting to jump on that bandwagon. And, so that's going to be something, that combined with just this online pet marketplace is something that we just need to stay ahead of. But I think we're on such a great trajectory. Yeah. So much more awareness now than there was when I started on this. And there's just, I think there's a lot to be thankful for and a lot to be hopeful about when it comes to this whole issue. And I feel excited to see what's going to happen next.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This was just fantastic. Is there anything that you want to add, or anything that you are working on moving forward that we haven't touched on that you want to share?
I mean, I think that the really important takeaway for me is that this is a national issue. Animal welfare is a national issue with a national solution. Yeah. And every person, whether they have a pet, whether they like pets, they're impacted by it. Yeah. They have a hand in supporting their community and what happens to the members of their community, whether they're human, whether they're animal. And so I think sharing what you know and educating your friends and your network and your family about just the benefits of adoption and the problems with certain pieces of it, whether it's puppy mills or, there's a lot of things that fall under animal welfare that we've learned about just through educating our friends and our colleagues, and being patient and understanding and kind to those who aren't where we are yet. Right. We've all evolved. I mean, I said at the beginning, I used to have
yelling at people isn't helpful. Yeah.
Yelling at people is never helpful. Shaming people has never worked, ever. Nope. I don't know why people still think that that's going to happen. And, I get a lot. I mean, sometimes I have friends who, crawl up to me and say, I feel so terrible, but I bought a puppy. I didn't know it. And I just say, you know what, that's okay. Next time, now and next time, so I think being kind and patient with one another, which is good advice anytime, right? But now more than ever, you'll never get anywhere by making people feel bad. And we all evolve at our own pace and in our own time. And so help people along and help them, do the right thing when it comes to animals, because animals are so important to all of us. And we always say at Best Friends, kindness to animals makes a better world for all of us. And it really does. We're not mutually exclusive. Right. And so it's important to make the world a better place for people and for animals. And that means being kind to one another and being kind to the animals that we love.
For people who might want to embark on a journey in animal advocacy, or even just, help out on their days off, what are some things that you recommend, or how does somebody go about that, or how they start their journey, I guess?
So that's the great thing. There's so many opportunities in every single community across the country, even if there aren't opportunities to work directly with animals in your community. I know that Best Friends and a lot of other organizations have a lot of remote opportunities to help. And that can be something like as sort of innocuous as data entry to, making thank you calls to donors. There's so many different things that you can do, even if you're not living in a place where you are exposed to animals, or even if you have allergies to animals, but you love animals. There's so many things that you can do to help. But if you can volunteer with your local shelter, I can't imagine a shelter ever turning down an opportunity for somebody to come in and help. And that too can mean a lot of different things, not just working directly with animals.
Especially right now. Yeah.
Especially right
We're
now.
having a bit of a crisis.
Are struggling right now, really, really struggling. So I would say if you can help your local shelter, that's a great way to help animals, help the shelter, help your community.
Yeah.
Best Friends has an enormous number of volunteer opportunities. I'm sure that the other national groups and statewide organizations have opportunities. So just dig around and see what's out there, and everyone will appreciate your time, no matter how much or little you have of it. Because I know that volunteers for Best Friends are the lifeblood of our organization. We could not do what we do without volunteers. And so I think that most organizations would probably say the same thing. So get involved, and get involved with your local government too. Your city council, your county supervisors, whatever it is that you have. It's a really interesting way to be a part of the community, and you really do have a voice, and you can affect positive change. I would encourage anybody who wants to get involved with policy to sign up to receive Best Friends advocacy alerts, because that's a great way to affect positive change in your city, at your state level. We make it very easy. We write out the communication to your elected officials, and you just, can edit if you want. You can click send, and that can make or break whether a good thing for animals is enacted or a bad thing for animals is defeated. So getting involved, politically and in terms of that kind of advocacy, grassroots advocacy is great. We have action teams in lots of communities across the country. bestfriends.org/advocacy. Lots and lots of great resources there, and lots of ways to help. So that's what I would love everybody to do.
And I will put that link in the show notes for people to reference if they'd like quick access there. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you so much for all the amazing work that you do. And thanks again for taking the time to chat here with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy that you are out there helping to spread the word, the very thing that I said I would love everybody to do. So thank you for all that you're doing. And it was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for joining me today for this episode of the Baru Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and follow the Baru Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have a behavior question or a health question or a story of canine companionship that you want to share on the Baru, you can email me, charlotte@thebaru.com, or you can call 424-273-5131 and leave a message. And don't worry, if you don't have a pen handy, you can find the contact info in the show notes. Okay, you guys, let's chat next week.